there's folks out there who say, okay, so we're on this verge of people have explored these mysteries. Do we trust these people to take us to that new frontier? Do we trust them enough to put food in our supermarket that has not been sprayed with something that, I'm using Roundup as a pesticide that our bodies will never be able to digest? Can we trust the new technology of travel? Can we trust, at what stage do we start beaming me up, Scotty? Do we trust AI? I think there's a huge distrust in that. What stage does Skynet become self-aware and the Terminators take over?
The big story of this moment of humans on Earth, and really of Earth, is that after 4 billion years of evolution, of life on Earth, our one species among the billions that it's ever lived suddenly has the increasing ability to engineer novel intelligence, what people call AI, and to re-engineer life. And the big question for our species and for the world is whether we're going to be able to use these almost godlike superpowers wisely.
Hey guys, welcome to the Chad Prather Show. It's good to be with you. Make sure you are clicking, liking, smashing that button that tells, the algorithm or the overlord gods of the internet that you like this show. Go to where podcasts are offered. Leave us a 5-star rating, and that's what we deserve. And make sure that you're leaving us a review. Don't really care what you say. You could say good things about me, but even if you say bad things about me, we just want the reviews. Come on, man. Drive us up those charts. It is all about my vain glory, and I need more of it, so help us out. It's hard to be an independent podcaster these days. Not really. I sit on my big ass and I talk, and that's pretty easy when you can make a living just running your mouth. And so we're going to do a little bit of that today, and I'm excited because an old friend of mine is back on the show. If you've been a longtime listener of this program, you were introduced to him, I guess it's been about 4 years ago, and man, time flies. He and I have gotten a little bit older, hopefully a little bit wiser. I don't know if he's got any more room in his brain for all the knowledge that he's got, but welcome back to the program, my friend, Jamie Metzl. Jamie, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing great, Chad. Great to be back with you.
You've got the new book out, Super Convergence. We're going to get into that and talk about it. You were on the show, I guess it's been about 4 years ago, your book, Hacking Darwin. But I got to ask you, since I haven't seen you since... Right. I guess that was pre-COVID, right. And you're in New York. How did you weather the end of the world living in New York through COVID? How was your COVID experience?
I have to say, COVID just pushed us all in lots of different ways. And for me, it was an incredibly productive time. I know in those early days of COVID, I could just divide up my friends into two categories. There were the people who were just kind of wide-eyed and just kind of deer in the headlights. And then there were the people like me, and I have other friends who were like this, who said, wow, the world is really changing fast. This is the pivot moments. And so for me, obviously it was a difficult time and lots of pain for everybody, but just very early on, I launched a new global interdependence movement in 2020 called One Shared World, because it just was kind of crazy that, we're all totally dependent on these, what looks to be like laboratories in China doing things right. And how could it be that we just have no say on how our world is organized when if something goes wrong, we are the ones who bear the brunt? So I was involved with that. I became deeply involved in the world of pandemic origins, and so was one of the leaders of this movement. It became a movement to try to dig deep on how did this terrible pandemic start. And I was the lead witness in the congressional hearings on pandemic origins, 60 Minutes. Leslie Stahl did a big piece on me and my work and this this topic, and wrote this new book. Now I have all these new kind of virtual friends because we all went virtual really quickly. And so it's been kind of fun over these last couple of years, traveling around the world and meeting physically for the first time people who I'd been on hundreds of video calls with. So like everybody, it kind of changed our lives. But I think there was a lot of pain and certainly for me, a lot of growth.
Yeah, and I think that's true for a lot of people. I know that it was a very creative time for me, just because we were forced to, right? We had to sort of sit there and get internal with some things. And and produce whatever was going on in our brains. And I wrote a book that was nowhere near anything like anything you've ever written. That's for certain. You have a history, though, and I want you to walk me through it a little bit, because I got to know you originally through your appearance on Joe Rogan's program, and then shortly thereafter, you came on mine. My haters, they loved to send me messages saying Rogan is a way better interviewer with Jamie than you ever were. And I was like, yeah, well, we have fun.
That's, everybody just needs to be the best version of ourselves that we can be.
I guess.
But you're way better looking. So those people are probably listening. They're not seeing the video.
It's true, and no doubt about it. My head is not growing at the same rate as Joe's is. Every time I see him, he's like Cro-Magnon. He's probably hacking Darwin and figuring out
him and Bobby Bonds.
There's a lot going on there genetically. But with your history with the World Health Organization and the UN and the things that you've been involved in, and I know that whenever we say those names these days, I know a lot of our audience would say the World Health Organization, they're the Antichrist. I mean, they're the devil incarnate, the UN. Oh dear God, it's the globalization, the one world government, the elites, the cabal. After going through the quote pandemic and what we saw of this global crisis, do you think that these different organizations that are out there, was it handled adequately? Are there things looking back? I know hindsight's 20/20, but are things that, what in your opinion, maybe could have been done differently with all of that?
Yeah, so many things could have been done differently. So many things could have been done better. And you don't have to say that the UN, the U.S. government, Chinese government, all these other organizations really failed in our response to COVID. Doesn't mean you need to say, well, these institutions are totally inherently failed organizations, but it means is that they're not where they need to be. So certainly with the U.S., we failed in all sorts of ways, and with the World Health Organization. We needed a world, as I was just saying, we needed a World Health Organization in the early days of the pandemic. And even before, we needed some way of mounting a collective response. And in those early days of COVID, in early 2020, even in latest 2019, the World Health Organization was trying to get information from China, and China wasn't giving that information. And so at the same time that Donald Trump in early 2020 was praising Xi Jinping and saying the Chinese are doing a great job, the head of the World Health Organization, Dr. Tedros, was saying pretty much the same thing. The Chinese are telling us that they've got everything handled. It was a total lie by the Chinese. And the WHO, I don't think they didn't do a great job in the response to COVID-19, but part of the question we have to ask is, well, why? And so in those early days when China was lying, the WHO doesn't have a mandate to say, hey, you have to tell us the truth, or we're going to send our people to China whether you like it or not. The governments are the bosses of the World Health Organization. And the World Health Organization has a budget that's smaller than the average American teaching hospital, like what you have in Houston or us in New York. And of that budget, they only control 20%. 80% is earmarked by the governments. So for sure, the WHO didn't do a great job in its response. But I think we need to ask that deeper question of why. Like, we would have wanted the WHO to do a better job in thinking about, well, how can we build healthcare capacities in countries all around the world? Because what we learned in the United States, even though our system didn't do all that well, we were dependent on these healthcare systems, primary care healthcare systems, in those places that Donald Trump once lovingly called shithole countries. So in these other places, like if Haiti or if some country in Africa has a broken down healthcare system, and there's a global pandemic, the virus is going to go there. It's going to mutate in places like that. And because we're all connected to each other, it's going to come back here. So I totally get why people are afraid of the United Nations, afraid of world government, afraid of the World Health Organization, just because, our ancestors, for most of our history as a species, we live in these little small bands of roving nomads. And you can trust this guy. And then we got a little bigger and, you could trust maybe people in your community. And now it's like, well, you're saying, well, I'm supposed to trust the whole world or people working for the United Nations. And then on top of that, we get just these signals of just weird stuff, coming from all around. So I'm not here to say I totally defend everything the United Nations is doing. As a matter of fact, just this morning, I was tweeting against the Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, who's going to join Putin in the BRICS summit, where my feeling is, what's he doing that for? Russia's invaded Ukraine. So I think there were real questions, but I'm a believer in the WHO. After the Chinese CRISPR babies were born in 2018, I was a member of the WHO Expert Advisory Committee on Human Genome Editing. And the reason I did is somebody's got to figure out what are the kind of rules of the road, because we humans are getting so powerful. Just small numbers of us have the ability to create global pandemics killing millions or maybe billions of people. And we just don't have the luxury of saying, well, we only want to have a U.S. government or city government. We're all connected, whether we like it or not, and we need to figure out how to make it work.
You guys know that I love Patriot Mobile. They are good friends and great patriots. And, they realize that Americans are tired. They're tired and frustrated by the stalling economy, the inflation, the endless wars, the relentless assault on our values. And thankfully, folks over at Patriot Mobile, they got your back. They still believe in America. They believe in our Constitution. And I'm so proud over the years to have partnered with them and continue to do it, because Patriot Mobile, they're on the front lines, man. They're putting their money where their mouth is, and they're fighting for the First and Second Amendments, the sanctity of life, our military and first responder heroes. I want you to take a stand with them on conservative causes and put America first by switching over to Patriot Mobile today. You're going to get the same nationwide coverage as the big providers, because Patriot Mobile, they operate on all three major networks, plus they back their service with a full coverage guarantee. Their 100% U.S.-based customer service team will take care of you. They will find the best plan for your needs. You can keep your number, keep your phone, or you can upgrade, and they'll help. Go to patriotmobile.com/Chad or call them 972-PATRIOT. You do it right now, you get a free month when you use the offer code CHAD. You know I spell it Chad. Use that offer code and don't get fooled by the other providers pretending to share your values or have the same coverage. They don't, and they can't. So join me. Switch to America's only Christian conservative mobile provider. That's Patriot Mobile. Go to patriotmobile.com/Chad. Call them 972-PATRIOT. Get your free month of service today. Use that promo code Chad. Hang tight. We'll be right back. And that brings up a thought that I don't think has ever crossed my mind, because I sit around trying to ask myself, what is it about these organizations that we don't trust? And maybe it's because we don't see them or pay attention to them, or they're not relevant until there's this major apocalyptic event going on.
Yeah,
and then they kind of come to the forefront.
They do, and then they tend to not do a great job for all the same reasons. I mean, I think that even when the UN was created in the 1940s after World War II, there was a debate about how powerful do we want the UN, and then the countries won, which was saying we don't want it too powerful. We want to have national sovereignty, be kind of the dominant principle in the world, but we know that we need to find ways of cooperating. And so it's kind of this push and shove. When the UN tries to get involved, it's kind of feckless. I mentioned Antonio Guterres, the current Secretary General of the UN, who's the former Prime Minister of Portugal. And basically, the way he got this job wasn't by being the most competent person in the world, the person who said, we're going to solve this problem, whatever it takes. It was, he found a kind of a way of being supported by different people, sucking up to the Russians just enough so that it wouldn't be vetoed, sucking up to the Chinese just enough. And then we're surprised that we're in a situation like this where Russia's invaded Ukraine and the Secretary General of the United Nations isn't that relevant. And so I'm probably even more frustrated than than most people who don't have the same maybe historical knowledge that I do. But I think that the answer isn't that we can't have some kind of global coordinating mechanism. We just need it. Our species has become so powerful with all these abilities to do all kinds of wonderful things and terrible things. And it's not a choice. We've got to come together and figure out how to manage that. And then the UN was an idea from the 1940s that hasn't realized its potential. And so we have two kind of options. One is to say, well, let's get rid of the whole thing. But if we do that, we're just going to have another crisis. And then we're going to have to say, all right, well, how do we build it back? And so my view is, why don't we say, all right, well, let's look at what we have now. Part of it, a lot of it's not working. Some of it is. How do we build on the good stuff and try to fix the problems?
Yeah, it's like a global homeowners association.
Yeah, no, it is. I think that's exactly right. And like in a homeowners, like in your neighborhood, you get, like if somebody is dealing drugs out of the house around the corner, somebody is letting their lawn go feral, or somebody has like 600 killer dogs that are running around the neighborhood, you get, hey, wait a second, we're in this home association. That guy's malfeasance will fundamentally impact my life. Yeah. That's the world we live in. I mean, that's the world that we're seeing now. We can't get away from it. And past generations, even of Americans who tried to get away from it. Right now, we're in the middle of this election season, and there's this America First slogan. Well, their first America First was Charles Lindbergh, and that happened in the 30s and in the 1940s, where the idea was Europe's problems are Europe's problems. We should stay away from this. And FDR, Franklin Roosevelt, who's more, my thinking is, I think, more like his, said, hey, wait a second. We tried that before World War I. We tried to stay out of it, and then we got pulled in. And then after World War I, we said, all right, we're leaving Europe. You do your own thing. And we pulled back. And then this thing came and got us. So that's why, for me, even if you're like all of us, patriotic Americans, I hope, we still need to say, well, America, it's part of our American Homeowners Association is the rest of the world. And whether we like it or not, we've got to play a positive role in building a community where everyone, including ourselves, can be as safe as possible.
Well, and I want to get into the book here in a second and kind of make some references to that. The book is called Super Convergence, and I want to get it over here on the screen. Everybody can get it. It's a beautiful book.
Thanks.
And it's a hefty tome. It is you really break a lot of great things down in here, and it's fascinating. Like Hacking Darwin was the same way. Just fascinating to read where we are in this race of humanity, in the scope of humanity. And to your point, we could talk about America first. We could talk about our nationalism. We could talk about our isolationism. I think there's a big sentiment here of just saying, screw the world. We're going to take care of ourselves. We're not going to send another penny to anybody else. They let them handle their own wars and handle their own problems and their own famines. But at the end of the day, we are intertwined. I used to say, there was, I can remember 25, 30 years ago, I'd say, man, it used to take people, months and months to go around the world. Now we can jump on an airplane and I can be in Islamabad, Yeah. I don't want to go there, but I can be there in a matter of hours. Yeah. But now, because of the internet and the developments that are there, I can almost travel at the speed of thought. I mean, I can read a Brad Thor book, or I can read a book by Jack Carr, and I can go pull up a map in Afghanistan and see where they're talking about. And I can see an aerial view of that, sitting there in my bed with my iPhone. I can do that. So the world is interconnected. We're intertwined, whether we like it or not. And what happens, with COVID in Italy affects me here, and it affects the people in China. And what happens in China affects, and as you said, in these shithole countries, ultimately, there's stuff growing on trees in the rainforest that if it got loose could kill every one of us.
And save every one of us. I mean,
it could save it. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a very good point.
The rainforest. So I completely agree.
Yeah. So how did you come? Tell me about the name Super Convergence. And is this a continuation of the Hacking Darwin volume, or is it? Tell me about it, because you've got how the genetics, biotech, and AI revolutions, which is fascinating. It should be fascinating for everybody. Will transform our lives, work, and world. Super Convergence. Tell me about it.
So when we talked last time, I'd just come out with Hacking Darwin, and Hacking Darwin, as you know, is about the future of human genetic engineering. And so I still get a lot of speaking invitations, and there are some people who go to those things and they have their PowerPoint decks and all those things. I rarely do that. What I do is just go and talk. I mean, and so what I found was, as I was giving my talks without it, and I never use notes and I never stand behind a podium, I just kind of walk around and talk with people about what's happening in the world and what's changing and what it means. And I would find that every time I'd give a talk, it would be, I don't know, like 3, 4, 5% different from the last time. And just as I was growing and learning and interacting with people, my talk just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And so what started as the conversation about the future of human genetic engineering, I kept telling people, this is just one little piece of a bigger story, because the big story of this moment of humans on Earth, and really of Earth, is that after 4 billion years of evolution of life on Earth, our one species among the billions that it's ever lived suddenly has the increasing ability to engineer novel intelligence, what people call AI, and to re-engineer life. And the big question for our species and for the world is whether we're going to be able to use these almost godlike superpowers wisely. And as it was explaining that to people, I'd say, well, here are the things that you need to know. One is just how technological change works and why it's accelerating. And two is your question about super convergence. I mean, the big stories. One is human brain power. 100 years ago, we only had about 2 billion people on Earth, which seemed like a lot of people at the time, but we've quadrupled that now. We have more than 8 billion. So that's just a lot more human brain power. And the reason is because of all of these technological revolutions and agricultural revolutions. We just, like where you are in Texas, where I originally come from, in Missouri, when you fly over that, you see just some of the most productive farmland, not just in the world, but in the history of the world. Our ability to create so much food, which allows us to support so many people around the world. That's just a lot more brain power.
Hey guys, let me ask you a question. Do you feel like our country is going in the right direction, or are we sort of kind of falling apart? Well, if you're feeling alarmed, you're not alone. I feel the same thing, and a lot of people do. That's why a lot of Americans from a lot of different walks of life are taking action right now to prepare for whatever's coming next. And it starts with having an emergency food supply. Storing food in your home, it's the right thing to do because, hey, we live in crazy times and you never know what's coming next. So a lot of people, they're out there preparing. Right now, you can get ready as well with the 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. It comes with delicious food. Let me tell you something. Their 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply is fantastic. You need to get one kit for every member of your family. I mean, it's got food you wouldn't expect in there, like creamy stroganoff, honey wheat bread, mushroom rice pilaf. The entire kit is going to offer 2,000 calories every day, and the food kit's going to last up to 25 years in proper storage. And who knows what the country is going to look like by then. Just be ready. So when that day comes, you'll know you got what you need. So go to preparewithchad.com and order your 3-month emergency food kit from My Patriot Supply. Go to preparewithchad.com.
Then we're networked to each other. It's the point that you just made about laying in bed. But if you're thinking about solving a problem, you don't need to, like in the old days, if you're living out on the frontier in some little log cabin and you have a problem, you think, what do I have? I've got a bucket, I got a hammer, I've got a horse, whatever I got. How am I going to solve this problem? All of our natural instincts, I'm just going to go online, I'm going to look at a YouTube video. But that applies for everything. If you're a researcher, if you're a cancer researcher or anybody, your starting point at every moment is the frontier of knowledge, because we have access to everything. So nobody's wasting time solving problems that have already been solved. And then there's this point of super convergence, that it's not the story of any one technology, although we have lots of cool technologies. Every technology is embedded in every other technology. Just a simple story about that. So, 10 to 12,000 years ago was the beginning of the agricultural revolution. Our ancestors before that, we did hunting and gathering, which was a great way to do things. And we were great hunters, and our biology and our social organization had really helped us with that. But then once we had farming, we could create agricultural surpluses. And that's what allowed us to build bigger civilizations in our cities. But then when we had those bigger, and now, so agriculture is a really aggressive technology. Agriculture is as transformative as AI, maybe even more so. So then we had these big civilizations, and they needed to be organized. And so we developed writing. And then if we were to just, if your producer were just to press a few buttons for this video call that we're using to record this podcast, and just put the code up on the screen for your viewers to see, what would they see? They'd see ones and zeros of digital code. They'd see the letters of the computer code. What are those things? The letters are Latin letters, which are really ancient Phoenician letters, and the numbers, the ones and zeros, we call them Arabic numbers, but they're really Hindu numbers. And these are these very ancient codes that made computer code possible. And with the computer revolution, we have the machine learning revolution. With the machine learning revolution, we have the AI revolution. And now with the tools of AI, we're able to understand patterns in the world around us at scales which are just way beyond what our unaided brains can do. And so, for example, we can really deeply examine how a plant diffuses nutrients through a leaf, which may sound like not a big deal, but that's hundreds of millions, maybe even billions of years of evolution, of all kinds of trial and error, have created this really efficient mechanism. And then what we can say is, all right, well, looking at that pattern, can we make better computer chips using these natural patterns? And it turns out that we can. And that's why we're at the verge of this big takeoff, especially with manipulating these living systems around us, which we've done for a very long time. But in the 1880s, Carl Benz in Germany, he was one of the probably the biggest inventor of the car. And so he was there, and he kind of understood horse carriage, and he understood the basics of science at that time. But just imagine that he had a Porsche parked in his workshop, and every time he was thinking about how are we going to solve this problem, he could just go and look at the Porsche from today and say, oh yeah, that's pretty interesting. They have a carburetor, or they have all these mechanisms. We have that Porsche in the sense that we have 4 billion years, the outcome of 4 billion years of evolution and all these living systems. And we can just look at them, and we don't have to say, how do we store data for millions of years? Because right now we store it on magnetic tapes that are good for like 30 to 50 years, we're creating so much data, which is why we're building so many of these data centers. But we can just go and say, all right, well, nature over 4 billion years has figured out how to store data in DNA, and under the right circumstances, it can last for 2 to 5 million years, and it's 1 million times denser than silicon. Well, how could we store data learning from those principles? So basically, the issue of superconvergence is just the kind of summary is we're at this technological takeoff moment. But as I said in the beginning, it's not about the technology. It's about us. It's about values. And I certainly don't want people to feel disempowered that this technology is moving so fast. Who am I? My message is actually the opposite. We are creating this technology, and so we need to guide it. And that doesn't just mean people in the United Nations and government. It doesn't just mean scientists or people in technology companies. It really means everybody. Everybody at every level. And it's even, I live in New York City, so I know a lot of other people in New York City might think, oh, there's like the fancy people here and then the flyover people. And as I said, I come from Missouri. But go to any any farmer at any kind of scale really in this country. I mean, their level of technology is just unbelievable. I mean, the average cattle farmer is increasingly a geneticist. I mean, they really need to understand science. If people understood the sophistication of all of the decisions that crop farmers are making and the amount of data that goes into those decisions, I mean, it's pretty incredible. So I personally believe that every single person at every level has something important to say about our future. And if we can't build structures and democratic systems that listen to people, and people have different educations, backgrounds, vocabularies, that is just to be expected. If we can't build systems that listen to people, so people feel that they're part of the decision-making process for what goes forward, people are going to get angry and people are going to get hostile because it's going to feel like the future is just happening to them rather than they are part of a collective process of saying, hey, where do we want to go and how can we get there and how can we get there together?
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people are living right now. There is a fear to the thing. I know when Elon Musk, well, let me back up before we bring up Elon Musk, because that could go a lot of ways. But, I think that there's so much that people don't know. Like I get a kick out of a cell phone call drops and the person calls you back and says, I don't know what happened. Right. Well, no shit. Like, I mean, there's so many things that could have happened. I mean, somewhere the ones and the zeros got lost between here and the satellite that's, hundreds of thousands of miles in the sky. And I wasn't talking to you anymore. So there's so much that we don't understand. And it's an interesting, you bring it up in the book and a few different places talking about, your farmer I was just in Northeast Arkansas, there's cotton fields everywhere out there. There's corn fields, there's rice fields out there everywhere. These people are in they're not farmers anymore. They're geneticists. They're biotechnicians. It's a very sophisticated thing. They're chemists. Yep. There's so many different things that go into this now because of everything from not just the process of growth. I mean, it's more than putting a seed in the ground and sitting out there and hoping that a kernel of corn produces a stalk of corn. It's more than that now. Everything, there's modifications to it. There's chemicals involved. There's pesticides. You name it. There's such a fine balance. So there's so much that people don't know. And you're right. Like if you say I'm going to drive that Mercedes Benz, I don't go back and study what the Model T looked like. Right. I start where I'm at right now, and we're moving forward because somebody went out there and explored that mystery and now took it to another level. And so I'm starting from that frontier. Yep. So, you take a guy like Elon Musk, as I was going to say, and he's sort of become a superhero for people on the right, specifically right now because of his affinity or his association with Donald Trump. And here's a guy who did something that I thought was in many ways great with his purchase of Twitter and kind of opening up some free speech. There's an argument to be had there. But there's a lot of people who still, and I certainly have been one, who said, well, I don't know if I trust this guy or not when he starts talking about the aspects of transhumanism and we're gonna make you can put a chip in your brain and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, okay, well, where's the orgasm button? Because I want to push that away. So my brain goes to some pretty bad and humorous places, obscene, I would say. But there's folks out there who say, okay, so we're on this verge of people have explored these mysteries, and do we trust these people to take us to that new frontier? Do we trust them enough to put food in our supermarket that has not been sprayed with something that, Roundup is, I'm using Roundup as a pesticide that our bodies will never be able to digest? Can we trust the new technology of travel? Can we trust, at what stage do we start beaming me up, Scotty? Do we trust AI? I think there's a huge distrust in that. I mean, Newsweek, literally at the time of this taping, Newsweek came out with an article yesterday that was so asinine, it's silly, where they said Donald Trump may have altered an AI image to make it look like he played for the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Oh, I saw that.
Like, no kidding. I don't think he went and played in the third quarter.
Yeah.
So, and I'm like, really, we know that. But at what stage in the game does it become this hard delineation to differentiate what is imagination and AI and what is, and how does that play out in our practical everyday life? Is this, I guess what I'm saying is, at what stage does Skynet become self-aware and the Terminators take over? I went into the Blaze Studios the other day, and they had this robot dog running around that Glenn Beck is apparently buying several of these to monitor his ranch in Idaho. And I'm like, what the F is going on? Let's shoot it with a shotgun right now. And then I saw the party where Elon Musk has his robots out there. No. I don't know. Who do we trust at this point?
And those robots were, in fact, controlled by humans. Yes. So, but a lot of questions in there. And so just, the robo dog is a technology, and the shotgun you're using to kill the robo dog is also a technology. So the question is just, how are we thinking about those technologies? Certainly, not everybody is going to understand every technology. We can't. Yeah. So there are a few people who understand why your cell phone call dropped, and then there's some other people who are understanding why your oncology drug worked, and so that's why we're in a community. Everybody can do something special, which I talked about before. But that's why governance and accountability and voice are really so important. When people feel that they aren't stakeholders in the society in which they live. And by stakeholders, I also mean partial decision makers. No one makes the whole decision, but just that democracy is at least allowing their voice to be heard. That doesn't mean we have to everyone has to win everything. But if you feel you have no voice, you're going to say, all right, well, what else can I do in order to have my voice heard? And I think that's a little bit of the toxicity. In terms of Elon Musk, let me put it this way. I won't name the company, but I've been a keynote speaker for one of the biggest technology companies in the world. They do an annual conference, and I won't even mention the first letter of their name, G. So I was invited to a lunch. And it was just a small lunch, and there were two people who were there who were kind of like you, who kind of we've made our livings by our wits, charm, and words. And then most everybody else there was a technology founder. And I realized something very quickly. All of these guys, when they were in high school, when people like you were out kind of charming young girls and playing sports and the things that I was doing, I'm sure you were more successful at the charming. These guys were sitting in their basements coding, with no people there, but just because that was like an alternate universe. And then these guys have been really, really successful, and they've built these multi-billion-dollar companies, and we've put them on these pedestals, and we've said, because you were so successful in this one domain, you are now empowered to tell us how we should lead our entire lives. And I just think that's dangerous. I mean, certainly there are people who are on the autism spectrum who are just unbelievable performers. We need those people doing specialized tasks. But shame on us if we're saying that those kinds of people who just kind of are seeing humans as accounting units and want to blast us to Mars or whatever. So I think we've got to be a little bit more critical. And certainly with Elon Musk, and again, just full disclosure, my politics are a little bit are different. But I had concerns about Elon Musk's purchase of Twitter. One, because it just raised question that he paid so much more than the established value of Twitter, which made me think, well, why would somebody buy something for so much more than its established value? And my hypothesis is that he kind of recognized that we live in an attention economy, and that if you're the center of the story, you can translate that story into wealth and power. And the Kardashians were the pioneers of that. Donald Trump is living in that world. Elon Musk is living in that world. Greta Thunberg, who started out as like a little kid who cared about climate, now is like she just has to be in every story. And so she's out, supporting Hamas and getting carted away by the police because it's like she's she has to be at the center of that story.
Right.
And the thing that worries me about Elon Musk is that if this happened in Russia or in some other country, we say there was like some oligarch and he paid 6 times more than the value of an asset to take control of that asset, which was kind of a central communications hub. And then that person endorsed one of the candidates. And then at the same time of the endorsement, the candidate said, well, this guy who's now endorsing me, if I'm elected, I'm going to put that person in charge of revamping all of our regulations, including the regulations overseeing that person's multiple companies. And then if there are people saying, oh, hold on, wait a second, this same guy doesn't just control our information flows, but the same guy is literally building companies to put chips on our brains. And if, I get there are limited government people. I don't think the government should be just unlimited. But I think if somebody's putting a chip into our brains, I'd like to have somebody regulate that person. And if we didn't have a government, we'd want to form a government in order to do it. And so all I'm saying is these are big, tough, complex issues. And I do think that we humans have a tribal instinct. It's where we come from evolutionarily. But I think that if our politics just become tribal, that we aren't kind of like thinking, well, what do I believe? We're just thinking, well, I'm for this guy, and then I'm against that guy. But I'm a Democrat, but I have a lot of issues where I feel like I'm more aligned, at least with centrist Republicans, because I look at the different issues and I say, well, actually, this doesn't make sense to me. That makes sense to me. I can't stand these far left Democrats, the quote unquote the squad. I have much more in common with centrist Republicans than I do with these far left Democrats. But I think if we become just tribal and if we just turn off our critical faculties, we're going to be in danger. And again, that's the work that I'm doing, the books that I write, why I try to make them accessible, because I really want people to feel empowered because these big decisions are coming. And Glenn Beck, I mean, it may be a good idea. I mean, that actually, these robotic dogs may help, but you have to compete with actual dogs. And actual dogs, as everybody knows, are just incredible. I mean, the level of instinct, the level of complexity. We are decades, maybe centuries away from making AI systems that are as broad and complex as our brains or even dog brains. But we are now making AI and other machine systems that are really spectacular at doing individual things. And so we have to figure out for those individual things, how do we want our machines to work? And then what does it mean to be a great human? And so I do think that this is going to push us to say, well, as a human, maybe pattern recognition isn't the core of my humanity, but empathy and creativity and connectivity and community building, that's really important. And maybe just like farmers, I mean, 100 years ago, most of us were farmers. 1,000 years ago, almost everybody was a farmer. If you had asked your ancestors, you say, well, they came here with time travel and they said, well, you got a cowboy hat, you must be a farmer. And it's like, oh, no, I'm a podcaster. It's like, what do you do as a podcaster? It's like, well, I sit in my basement and I talk to people. And they'd say like, what? That's a job? I mean, all of us have jobs that our ancestors wouldn't have recognized as gainful employment. And so this stuff kind of changes, and every generation is afraid of the new thing. And they're not wrong, because the new thing always has some downsides. But that's why, again, the onus is on us to say, all right, all this stuff is changing. How do we want it to change? And then, so that means we have to learn a lot, but we need to engage a lot. We need to keep coming back to issues of who are we and what do we value?
Yeah, and I think that's one of the reasons why movies about time travel fascinate people,
Yep.
right? Because now you see a person from one era that's suddenly juxtaposed into another situation, and then how do they relate to that based on their mindset? And because again, you have to interpret people historically based on the times in which they lived, and that's fascinating to watch those worlds collide. And we're literally living in a collision of worlds right now. There's the old school way of thinking. And what you said, I want to say, Jamie, what you said about somebody inserting themselves into the center of the conversation to become more relevant, ultimately have more power and control over the things that ultimately regulate what they do, that puts money and power in their pocket. That's profound. And I want everybody to pay attention to what Jamie said on that. If you're listening to or watching the show, rewind that, listen to that again, because that could not be any more relevant to what we're living through right now on both sides politically, but in terms of the business. I mean, you have these people who are suddenly going, why in the hell is Mark Cuban suddenly relevant on these things just because the guy's worth $6 or $7 billion? Why the hell are we listening to his political opinion or celebrities or anybody? But you're right. I mean, that is the human nature. So I think it does become an aspect of, all right, we're in this world. This world is not reversing. It's not going back. We're way past the point of no return. So who do we trust in this? And I think that, I'm one of those guys. I get skeptical when something starts to smell like the philosophy of humanism, because I think that people, by and large, we have this innate desire to want to believe that people are good, but we know that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. We've just seen that over and over again. And when somebody is just beyond accountability or consequence and they've set themselves up as a power player, we're not living in the turn of the 20th century where, as prior to World War I, people were looking in the mirror and 20 times a day saying every way I'm getting better and better. And World War I happened, and we realized people are still evil.
Yep.
There's the atrocities of war, man's inhumanity to man. How dangerous is this as you see it, as we move forward? And are there people that are going to be players in this game that we can trust?
Yeah, so I fully agree with what you just said about accountability. I mean, these capabilities are getting so powerful that we need to have systems of accountability. We have a great one here in the United States with our democracy. I mean, for most of history, people really haven't had that, the ability every 2 years or 4 years to say, all right, you're fired, I'm going to do something different. And so for me personally, and again, I spoke about my politics, that's why I'm so concerned about these attacks on the legitimacy of succession, because the people who are, whether they're attacking poll workers or who are making claims against the legitimacy of our elections that aren't backed up by evidence, or who are just saying, I'm not going to accept the election, because succession, the core reason to have a democracy is to solve the problem of succession. That's what happened to all these old empires. You'd kind of have the emperor who'd do maybe a good job for 20, 30, 40 years. And then because they were doing a good job, they'd had like 10 million kids, and then that person would die and all the kids would fight each other and everyone would scheme. And then they'd have a civil war, and pretty much all the places fell apart because of that. And the reason to have a democracy is to say, hey, we can solve that problem so we can have new ideas and people can be bought into those new ideas, and we can have constant churn. It's worked for us for a while. And now certainly we're in this crisis of democracy, and different people of different backgrounds might have a different explanation as to why. And then we have these super empowered people who are stepping forward, and we've talked about two of them. And I believe that nobody should be above the law or above the system. And we certainly in the 1920s, in the so-called Gilded Age here in the United States, we didn't have these kinds of regulations. And so we had the people like JP Morgan and others who just became so much bigger than the system. And then we collectively, through our democracy, came together and said, all right, we need to limit that. whether these guys are good guys or bad guys is not even the point, because there will be good guys and there will be bad guys. But if we create this as a goal and as one of the options, everyone or many people are going to aspire to it. And I think that we were better off when we said that nobody is above the system. We have a set of rules, and those rules apply to everybody. And now for a mix of reasons, different people are feeling, well, hey, that's not happening. And I for one, believe that people on both sides of the political spectrum have legitimate claims about why the system isn't working for them and why it's not fair. So I'm not denigrating anybody's views, but it's certainly my view that the way that we're going to overcome this division is by coming together and saying, well, what are the rules of the road that we would like to apply to everybody? This is a really obscure reference, so I'll try to make it as simple as possible. But there was a philosopher named John Rawls. And Rawls, his philosophy was, it's called the original position. And basically it's, if you or all of us were engaged in a process, we're saying I'm going to organize a society, and I can organize the society in any way that I want. But the only catch is I don't know what role I'm going to play in that society. So you can organize it, but you may come back as whatever, the king or the president or the fry guy or whatever. How would that inspire you to think about structuring a society where you had kind of enough inequality so that there was innovation and drive, but not total inequality so that people had no chance? If you didn't know where you were going to go, how would you organize society? I think it's, in my mind, a useful way of thinking about your question of that if our strategy is, well, we're going to super empower these people above the system, whoever they are there good guys? Will they be good guys or bad guys? And who are the good guys and bad guys? And different people will have different lists. But in my mind, and we will get good guys and we will get bad guys through that system. In my mind, it's better for us to say, what's the kind of system that we want that applies to everybody? And so the thing, whatever the thing is that I'm supporting on my side, how would I feel if the other side did that exact same thing? And so for me as a Democrat, obviously the January 6th stuff is highly relevant. But for Republicans, they could say, all right, well, what happened with the appointment of Kamala Harris as the Democratic nominee, and what was that process after the Republican convention? Both of those are just very legit questions that people ask. But again, the way I like to think about this is from a systemic way. And I frankly, I think it's a way of getting above these divisions that are just tearing our society apart. And I just think it's so unnecessary. I mean, America, it's such a phenomenal country. I talked about my being from Missouri, but I'm actually the son of a refugee. My father and grandparents came to the United States after the war, fleeing Nazism. And I got to say, I know there are a lot of patriotic Americans here and listening to your show, but nobody loves America as much as the kids of refugees who got here coming from a place where everybody wanted to kill you, where you can realize your dreams and contribute and build. And so this is the blessing that we have to be born in this incredible place is amazing. And it breaks my heart to see so many of us at each other's throats when we have so much more to do, so much more to build, and we could do so much more together.
So, and I agree with you. I think we have to get a higher vision. I think that there is, if there's ever going to be order, well, let me go even further down the line. If there's ever going to be peace, there has to be order. If there's going to be order, there has to be government or governance. Yes. It's got to be proper. I mean, there's got to be engineering and architecture that puts those things together. And the problem is we're so focused on the chaos and the lack of peace, the absence of peace, that we have not gone up to that governance place to get a bigger vision that I think ultimately can bring us together. And that's why I think we end up with certain anomalies, and then those anomalies divide us. Yeah. And conspiracy theories come out because there's a vacuum. We receive only so much information, and then they stop talking about it, and there's that information vacuum, and our imaginations, questions, ideas, and opinions rush to fill it, and the theories come out. Or, as I said, the anomalies, a guy who didn't campaign and who was obviously in a mental deterioration situation gets 81 million votes, which is historically insane, and more black votes than Barack Obama did in two different elections. And so we're going, okay, what the hell's going on? What is happening here? And so people feel like that those institutions and that sense of democracy have been violated in some way. And I think those reactions, they tend to allow the emotions that ultimately would not run amok in these various situations, as we've seen, culturally and in our society here in America. We wouldn't see, Ferguson. We wouldn't see Minneapolis burning. We wouldn't see the George Floyd riots. We wouldn't see the rise of these different organizations, January 6th. We wouldn't see so many different things that were, Charlottesville. We wouldn't see these things happening if we get a higher vision of all of that. And I think that's, what I agree with you in regards that we've got to get above that. We got to get above that perspective. But man, I don't know. There's so much lack of trust in our institutions, whether it's the courts, whether it's the media, the educational system, on down the line, and people are just at each other's throats. And again, you doing a fantastic job, and I want to encourage people to get Super Convergence. And if you haven't read Hacking Darwin, I encourage people to do that because, you and I, we tend to come from different perspectives, probably different paradigms and worldviews, and that's okay. That doesn't threaten me. It doesn't threaten you. That's why we're friends. And so, whenever we look at stuff like this, I want to encourage people, this is not some deep, heady volume that you're going to be lost in. The beauty of what Jamie does is he breaks it down for you, and regardless of what your underlying faith base or your viewpoint or your Weltanschauung, whatever that may be, you're going to get a lot out of this because you break it down to the simple characteristics of where we're living day in and day out. And this ultimately is the world we're living in. I mean, this is the direction that the world is going. I said to somebody just this week, we may not see the full ramifications of the things we fear right now. Every election is the most important election we've ever had in our lifetime, right? And there are some very heavy opposing ideologies at stake here on both sides. And this is where we are. But at the end of the day, these things that we fear, these things we hope for, I think all of those things are inevitable. But we've got to get above the nuances of how we interact, the rhetoric, the online speech, the attacking, these things. And I think you do a good job of talking about that bigger worldview from a higher level.
Well, you're kind to say, and it's certainly my view that we have these different futures ahead of us. Skynet or something like that's a possibility, and living in a world where we're coming together and working together, that's also a possibility. And it's the onus is on each of us in our different ways to work toward building the kind of future that we want and preventing the kind of future that we don't want. And that's always a balance. I mean, I'm a big believer in peace, but as people who follow me on Twitter, X know, I'm pretty aggressive on certain things. And whether it's China or Russia's invasion of Ukraine or these lunatics supporting Hamas on U.S. campuses, I mean, I'm very strong on those kinds of things. We need to figure out what's the right balance between building bridges and fighting bad things. And we have to do both. Everybody has a role to play. It's the exact point you made with the homeowners association. I mean, we were all in part of this homeowners and, part of the complex, the gated community is our little town, and part of it is our state, and part of it's our country, and part of it's our world. And that's a real, it's a real responsibility. And again, the mission of my work and my writing and great conversations like with you is to say, hey, we can do it. And even these big, powerful technologies, and they're coming at us faster than most people appreciate. And I want people to really, that's why I write the books, to be accessible, because we have to learn, we have to experiment and not be afraid, even though there's scary stuff. I mean, I talk a lot about the future of AI, and people say, oh, I'm afraid of AI. And I don't say, oh, you shouldn't be afraid. I say, well, that's a very logical response. You should be a little afraid and a little excited, and then start learning and engaging and say, well, where are the areas where I can play a role in building that kind of positive story. Yeah.
And you know what? Regardless of where we come from on the spectrum, whether faith or political or whatever that may be, from the urbanites, suburbanites, the agrarians, the rural people. I mean, look, I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to troubleshoot how to replace a solenoid on a 1996 British Land Rover that's sitting in my driveway and won't crank right now. Yeah. So I'm thankful there's guys like you who are out there on that frontier who are taking a look at this and saying, this is the world we're living in. This is how you interpret this, and this is where we're headed. And then you can embrace it or reject it. But regardless, we are living in a global community. And what happens around the world directly affects me. I won't say it's necessarily a butterfly effect from the ripple of the pebble in the pool, but it ain't far off from that. Yep. In the grand scheme of things, we're seeing these things played out. And again, where we started this conversation, the COVID pandemic was a perfect example of how mismanagement of these things happening around the globe affect every single one of us. I will say, on a funny note, I've been telling people lately, I said, I think they rushed monkeypox. I think they were trying to control us with the COVID, and they put the protocols, and we masked up and socially distanced. And then they said, we're losing control, so let's rush out monkeypox. And we said, what's the protocol for that? And they said, you can't rub your genitals on another person. And we were like, fuck you. We're going to rub our genitals wherever we want. This is America, by God. And so now they're reeling it back. They're rolling it back out again, Jamie. They're like, no, we're like, we have parades about our genitals. We wear pink hats and everything. So anyway,
I'm for freedom, but I feel crazy. Like all of what these things have shown us exactly is we live in a connected world.
Yes.
So in the connected world that's so big, our little communities, our families, our faith communities are more important than ever before. And if people feel that these big pressures are at odds with constructing our lives in the ways that give us happiness and meaning, that's going to be terrible. But I think the thing is, it's again, back to your homeowners. It's like, I love my family. I love my house. I love my community. How do I just think about what's the balance of responsibility that I have just to make sure that every part of my world is as safe for me as for everybody else. And I think just the point you made, we're just more connected to everybody else than we fully appreciate. And then we kind of take a step back and look at that. It kind of forces us to think, all right, well, how do we build that world?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you do a heck of a job, Jamie, and I appreciate you. Appreciate your friendship. The book, Super Convergence, get this thing, man. You got some great endorsements on it. And this is truly higher education that I encourage people to get a hold of. Where all can people find you? Where can they follow you on X and watch you stir that pot a little bit?
Thanks for asking. So easiest ways are my website, jamiemetzl.com, JamieMetzl.com. And on X, I'm at Jamie Metzl, spelled the same way.
Perfect. Man, I hear all those sirens going off there outside your New York flat. Yep. You at your home. So stay safe out there.
Do it.
I'm in North Houston. The crazies are here too.
The crazies are everywhere, but there are a lot more sane, loving people than crazies, and we got to work together.
We're going to get those chips and start with them. We're going to put them in their brains, and we're just going to create a whole new world order, man.
Yep.
Listen, I want to be one of the elites if that goes down. All right. I want to be one of the top guys.
I'll put you on the list. No, but hold on. I need to change, because while we were speaking, I signed you up for the digital orgasm trial.
Yes.
Based on what you said earlier.
You know what?
Let me take you off of that. You only get one.
I wasn't down with a rushed vaccine, but there's certain things I'm willing to be a guinea pig for.
Yeah, we're looking for a few good men.
We always say there's a reason God put the prostate where He did, or we'd be touching it all the time. So, Jamie, you're a hero, brother. I appreciate you so much, and thanks for this conversation. You always make me think, dude, and you brought out some great points today. And I'm thankful for it. Get the book, Super Convergence. Jamie, thank you so much, man. Hang tight. Don't run off just yet, Jamie. I want to talk to you some more off the line here. For the rest of you guys, check it out. Get both of those books. Hacking Darwin's an incredible book. I want to go back and refresh myself on that as well. But for those of you looking for me, if you want to just go out and find some fun, brainless stuff, come out to one of my live shows. WatchChad.com is where all the fun stuff is. And you can, again, keep tuning into this thing. We're doing our hot takes from a hot head every day. The little mini episodes come out during the day. You can find them on YouTube and Rumble. And then, of course, our bigger conversations on Tuesday and Thursday nights. We consider the Chad Prather Show a family, and we really appreciate you guys tuning in. So make sure you tell your family and friends about this episode and all the others if they've missed them. In the meantime, and for Jamie, I want to say thank you guys for listening, watching, sharing, liking, and supporting. We appreciate you so much, and we will talk to you next time. We love you. God bless. Bye.